Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban only gets better as time goes on, especially as I get older as well. It's no surprise that this is the favorite Harry Potter movie for so many fans out there. I also always thought highly of this movie, and now that I've watched it again after so many years, I can only appreciate it even more. So let's revisit this magical world with a new lens and see why it truly stands the test of time. I guess the first thing everybody will notice in his yearly Harry Potter marathon is the overall change of tone in this movie when compared to the first two. This Harry Potter movie loses that cute, childlike nostalgia for a world that feels a lot grimmer and more dangerous. As much as I love to revisit that childish style, I think this tone is a lot more fitting to what the Harry Potter movies eventually build up towards. And at the same time, it takes a very important step in having the world of Harry Potter mature with its audience and its actors. Daniel Radcliffe was 15 years old when this movie came out, and the character of Harry Potter is, I think, 13 years old. So you can start to play with some horror elements and have the characters deal with some more serious topics, like who assisted Voldemort in killing Harry's parents, and should they be murdered as well, or go to Azkaban.
I'm gonna be ready. When he does, I'm gonna kill him.
Having Harry say things like that is a huge change from the first two movies, and I'll go deeper into these adult themes later. With that change in tone, I think the filmmakers also managed to make this version of Hogwarts a lot more authentic and immersive. This starts with subtle but great details like having the actors dress up themselves, just like they would when they had to put on a school uniform like this in real life. So gone are these always perfect dressed kids, and now they look messy, more relaxed, and like actual young students. I know this can feel like a minor detail, but it's actually one of my favorite things about this movie. How do you feel about the new look of these characters?
I think they're funny.
Oh yeah, terribly funny. Really witty.
But the students don't just look different, they're also allowed to behave differently. They're just allowed to goof around more, and Draco feels more like a real bully in this movie. The filmmakers also take the time to include scenes like this one.
Don't try one of them. Oh no. Oh, look at this. Look at his face.
It's a scene that doesn't advance the story, and nothing from this is relevant later on, so it's a scene that could easily be cut out or not even have made in the first place. But I love that they kept it in, or made it in the first place, because this scene is actually not from the books. It's such a simple scene, but it shows us that they really are just a group of kids, and kids like to goof around. This can easily be overlooked because Harry is always our hero in these stories and has done some amazing things. So this reminds us that despite all of that, he is just a kid. This is also the first Harry Potter movie that really physically expands the world of Harry Potter. The layout of Hogwarts is more spaced out by having Hagrid's hut not immediately outside the school walls, instead it's a short walk away. Or the Whomping Willow that's now not on the school ground anymore but has its own location. We also visit places outside of Hogwarts, like Hogsmeade while they're on a school trip. Harry even couldn't go because he has no parents that would allow the trip.
Professor, I thought if you signed it, then I could go.
I can't. Only a parent or a guardian can sign.
Details like this really add up over the course of the movie, which makes Hogwarts feel more and more like a real school. Other examples that add to the authenticity and the darker tone of this movie are things like the Quidditch match that takes place in the rain. This not only looks amazing, but also fits into the realistic, more mature representation of Hogwarts. I mean, in a real school, matches like this would happen. It can't always be perfectly sunny like in the first two movies. Also, this is the first time Harry doesn't manage to catch the snitch, which, when we're talking about realism, feels like about time. Now, as always, you know I love to talk about the final battle in Harry Potter movies. In my last videos, it was sadly less talking, but more of a rant about how little magic Harry used and how I would love for him to use magic in a creative way. So now, with this amazing Harry Potter movie, have my wishes finally come true? No. We still didn't get any creative use of magic in this movie, but I love the final battle anyway. And here's why. Well, for starters, you won't believe it, but Harry actually uses a magic spell in the final battle and doesn't use a sword or his bare hands. That's a big upgrade already, if you ask me. However, they still make sure to give us that classic wizard with a wand decides to throw a rock instead scene. I guess magic is good and all, but throwing a rock never fails. Jokes aside, I guess if they would just bombard this werewolf with powerful spells, the final battle wouldn't really work, and I guess you could also argue that they don't use a spell because they don't want to harm Professor Lupin.
Oh, Professor Lupin's having a really tough night.
In any case, I'll give them the pass for that. The important part is that Harry eventually uses a spell, and not just any spell, but a spell that was set up prior to the final battle and we actually learned a lot about. It wasn't creative because we only know one spell against Dementors, so what other spells should he use? It's not exactly what I would call creative. But because Expecto Patronum got a proper setup and isn't like any other spell, this approach might be even better than having Harry be creative. Expecto Patronum is set up as a very powerful, difficult spell that not every student learns. It's not your average first grade levitation spell.
You know, this is very advanced magic, well beyond the ordinary wizarding level.
And it's also not a spell that you just cast. Instead, there are power levels to it, and they don't just tell us this as an exposition, but really take the time to show us how this spell works and how Harry struggles to cast it for the first time. For me, that alone would already be enough to make it a satisfying ending, but they took it a step further by having the power of the spell tied to the happiest memory the person can think of. That way the spell also gives us an insight into Harry Potter. At first, the happiest memory you could think of was flying on his broom for the first time, which just shows us how few happy memories he has to choose from. In the final battle, however, his Patronus becomes extremely powerful, and not just because the script needs it to be, but because he has a new happiest memory. And that's when Sirius Black offers him to live with him.
When we free him, I'll never have to go back to the Dursleys. It'll just be me and him.
Because of that, now Harry doesn't just win against the Dementors and save Sirius Black's life, but we also get the spell as a visual representation of how happy Harry was in that moment. It's just an amazing final battle. Finally, it was about time. Oh, and did I mention that during that greatness we also get time travel? I think I've rambled on long enough, so I'll keep this short. The time travel is satisfying, very well executed, a huge surprise when you watch the movie for the first time, and makes this movie very rewatchable. I feel like we just don't get things like this in movies nowadays. They could have left this entire time travel part out and the movie would have still worked, but it's things like this that take a movie from good to extremely memorable.
When in doubt, I find retracing my steps to be a wise place to begin.
The CGI takes another big step up from the first Harry Potter movies, this time also with a slightly higher budget. The Dementors look great with that amazing frost effect, the magic in general looks great, Buckbeak looks awesome, and I have no complaints about the CGI from today's perspective, and that really speaks volumes on the quality it had back then. I'll never forget the transformation of Professor Lupin into werewolf. This traumatized me as a kid. And speaking of that transformation, that brings me on to my top 3 scenes in this movie. With this movie, it was really tough to decide which 3 scenes are my favorite. There are just so many great scenes in this movie, and I would love to give them all credit. But then this video would be about 5 hours long, so let's keep it at 3. My first favorite scene is the werewolf transformation I just mentioned. It's one of my favorite scenes for so many reasons. First of all, what an awesome character design and transformation. Just the visuals alone, I mean. The design for the werewolf is so great. In my mind, this is how a werewolf should look, not that big dog shit from Twilight. When I think of a werewolf, I don't think of a big dog that someone would like to cuddle with. Instead, I think of this creature in Harry Potter. With its short gray hair, long thin limbs, but huge size, it looks so creepy and dangerous. It's also cohesive with the design from Sirius Black. And how Professor Lupin also transforms into this creature is so well done. The CGI in the 2000s was legit. I also love how Professor Snape instantly goes into protector mode once he sees the werewolf, but I'll talk more about that later. My next favorite scene is Harry flying on Buckbeak. What can I say? It's just an awesome scene. It's great to get a little feel for the surroundings of the castle, and the CGI again stands the testament of time, and Buckbeak isn't just a one-off show pony, but is relevant to the story later in this movie. That way this scene integrates very nicely and doesn't feel like an unnecessary extra. It's also just so refreshing to see Harry smile and full of joy. My last favorite scene is the introduction of the Dementors. What an iconic scene, right? This train ride with the attacking Dementors really sets the tone for the year of school to come. For the first time, the train ride isn't on a bright, sunny day and full of nostalgia. Instead, the weather is already very grim, and the freezing effect of the Dementors makes everything feel more harsh and scary. Also, the Dementors don't just attack Harry for no reason, but because of his dreadful past and his connection to Voldemort, which is something we don't know for certain now, but is just another of those subtle hints that pay off when you revisit this movie. I remember that as a kid, this movie felt like a full-on horror movie to me. That feeling is now gone. As I said, the Dementors and the werewolf effect still look great, so it's not because the effects look goofy for today's standards, but I've just watched a lot more real horror movies since then, so while there are definitely horror elements in this movie, it takes a bit more to traumatize me now. But there are also some scenes that kids might find scary, and for adults they're more goofy than scary. For example, I'm almost ashamed to say this, but as a kid this book used to scare the shit out of me, and now I just had to laugh at this scene. But on a serious note, this movie introduces a lot more adult themes to these young characters. The biggest one for me is dealing with loss. The Dementors force Harry to confront his fears and negative emotions. So for the first time, we reflect on his parents' death and consider how much this loss affects him. His growing desire to learn about his parents is relatable to anyone dealing with long-lasting effects of losing loved ones, a theme that resonates more with an adult audience. Then there is also the theme of vengeance. The story emphasizes the consequences of holding onto anger and hatred, particularly through Harry's struggle with how to handle Sirius Black, who supposedly assisted the murder of his parents. And when we find out that it was actually Peter Pettigrew, Harry decides to spare his life instead.
Peter, but if Voldemort didn't kill you, then we would. Together. No!
This introduces a complex ethical dilemma about mercy, revenge, and justice, highlighting a more mature understanding of morality. As I mentioned earlier, I also love how Snape went into full protector mode once he saw the werewolf. I'm sure we all noticed this when we first saw the movie, but probably didn't think much more of it, at least I didn't. I just thought, oh, so Professor Snape is not completely evil, that's nice, and moved on. But now that I've revisited this movie after having watched all the other movies, and now knowing where Snape ends up as a character and what he's been going through all this time, this little moment is everything to me. I mean, we need to remember that Snape has been mean to these three kids for so little reasons, and sometimes for no reason at all. And this time, Harry literally attacked him a minute ago, so Snape would have every reason to be angry with them. But despite all that, he doesn't even hesitate for 1 second, and instantly is prepared to risk his life for them. From an adult's perspective, maybe Snape has a similar protective feeling towards Harry as he would with his own child because he loved his mother so much. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The later movies deal with that a lot more. This is just a fun teaser. These themes make Prisoner of Azkaban one of the most mature and introspective films in the series, as it tackles concepts that resonate more with an adult viewer who can appreciate the nuanced portrayal of loss, revenge, and parenting. Overall, this is definitely my favorite Harry Potter movie that I've revisited so far. I love the final battle, the time travel, and the more mature themes. It took a big risk in its drastic tonal shift, but managed to pull it off without feeling out of place in the franchise, and actually set up the tone quite nicely for the movies to come. How much did you enjoy Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban? Please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.